We've all heard the old adage at one time in our life, drink 8 glasses of water a day and it will help you feel better. But is that really the case? Hello, I'm Mark Thomas, and during the next hour we will take a closer look at the water cure and endeavor to sort out the facts from the fiction. Helping us to do just that will be Dr. Robert Brown. Dr. Brown is the Chief of Infectious Disease at Wyoming Valley Healthcare System. Robert Butts. Bob is a local businessman and a strong proponent of the water cure. And Dr. F. Batman Gelage, author of several articles and a book on our need for water and its connection to illness. You are also invited to be a part of tonight's program by giving us a call at 1-800-326-9842 with questions and comments on the water cure. And our first question is going to be for Dr. Batman Gelage. Thank you all for being with us here tonight. Doctor, a lot of people have heard in some form or another of the water cure, or what they believe is the regimen of the water cure, but help explain it for everybody, because I think some people believe it might be 6 glasses, 8 glasses, no salt, lots of salt. What is it that you have proposed to be the necessary thing to do?
I discovered that water relieves pain of peptic ulcer disease. And in 2 years and 7 months, I treated over 3,000 people with peptic ulcer disease with only water. I asked myself, these people were thirsty. They didn't have a disease condition, although they had all the symptoms, signs, bleeding, and everything else. So when it came the time for me to research my concept that this was a thirst situation, I asked myself, why does the pharmaceutical industry want to treat this condition with antihistamines, Tagamet, Zantac, and whatever? So I went into the research of histamine, and I discovered that histamine actually is a neurotransmitter in charge of water regulation and drought management of the body.
Okay, so you were presented with a group of individuals that you were treating for a specific disease, but out of all of that, how did you come to, and what do you believe is the regimen that someone should follow?
I continued the research for the past 20 years of the role of water, and I reached the conclusion that the human body doesn't show its dehydration by a dry mouth. Dry mouth is not an accurate sign of dehydration, and we should prevent dehydration. And at the time, I treated the peptic ulcer disease patients with 2 glasses of water every 3 hours. And then gradually I refined it to about 6 to 8 glasses of water, and they all responded under stressful circumstances to 8 glasses of water.
Okay, Dr. Brown, what is, for our audience that may not know that, the peptic ulcer that Dr. Batman Gelage is talking about? And do you find his thought there that there would be some validity to that?
Well, peptic ulcer is pretty much like a sore somewhere in your gastrointestinal tract, usually in the stomach or the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. I find that this is fairly unconventional thinking. It's something that I'm not aware of, have not really seen in the literature that I've actually pretty much scanned and read over the last 30 years or so. I am the Chief of Infectious Disease. I also run the Department of Medicine, so that I actually keep an eye on a good part of the medical literature so that I can oversee all the different specialties in the Department of Medicine.
And really what we're talking about here isn't really anything new, from the standpoint that people have always sought different cures for different illnesses when they felt that conventional treatment may not be working for them, from bee stings for multiple sclerosis patients to other types of shark cartilage for cancer patients.
And there's a big push towards alternative medicine, and I think that comes out of a lot of the frustrations that we don't fix things very well. The biggest contributions of medicine over the years have been really preventative and the public health. I think vaccines have contributed tremendously. But one has to be careful. I think that, from my perspective, good science involves a randomized, prospective, double-blind, controlled trial that shows statistical significance between 2 different interventions, and then it's peer-reviewed and published. And I think that we should confine ourselves to that sort of data. Just recently, alternative medicine, St. John's wort in a number of studies, echinacea in a number of studies, and just in the last few days, a study on ginkgo biloba, have shown by using controlled trials, in other words, giving a large group of individuals one medication and giving them the medication, giving somebody else a placebo, and then blinding it so that both the evaluator and the patient are unaware of what they're getting, showed that there was in fact no improvement in memory or sharpness associated with ginkgo biloba. So you really do need to do controlled trials. We're all human beings, and we all have a lot of similarities, but each one of us is a different organism, and we respond differently to different interventions. So you have to be very careful that what works for one given individual doesn't get purported to work for all of humanity, because that's not the case. You can find individual anecdotes of responses to all different kinds of therapy. So you need to do these kinds of trials to weed this sort of thing out.
Well, Bob, you and I are the only two non-doctors at this table here tonight, so I think we're going to be challenged to stay up with everybody. But let's explain to folks, if you will, my description is a proponent, advocate, whatever you'd like to call it. You have invested your time and your money in your belief in the studies that Dr. Batman-Gelich has done. So I'll ask you to perhaps first finish some of the things that he didn't get to. It's not just the drinking of 8 ounces of water a day. There are other aspects to the approach that Dr. Batman-Gelich has put forward. And how did you get involved?
Well, I came across actually a solicitation for a newsletter. And a guy named Sam Beiser said he interviewed the man who made what he called the greatest health discovery in history. And you kind of say, yeah, right. But yet he made it kind of intriguing. So I did subscribe. I read the interview. Absolutely floored me. So I figured, well, I want to check this a little further. I called a friend of mine who's a very prominent medical doctor and the head of a local hospital, and was at that time. And I asked for his opinion. 4 days later he calls me and says, Bob, this is nothing but common sense. And going to put a lot of us doctors out of business.
Well, yeah, Bob, I agree with you.
So that got me excited.
It's nothing but common sense, and no one at this table is going to argue that drinking water is bad for you.
Let me finish what he said. He said, we all knew this, but he said, nobody ever explained it the way Dr. Batman-Gelich did. And he said, that's where the common sense come in. Because I wanted to interview Dr. Batman-Gelich on a radio program called Just Common Sense at WARD, which we did. Well, Sam Liguri was a program director over there at that time.
Yes.
And he had angina pains for 5 years, and he was faced literally with a bypass operation. Well, Sam jumped on it. He said, I'm going to try it. Within 2 weeks, no more angina pains. Within 4 weeks, no more hiatal hernia. Well, you know, maybe it's a fluke. But it became one person after another after another. And I'm saying, what in the world is this? In fact, Dr. B says, he says, you're skeptical. I said, yes.
So you came to this as a skeptic?
Yeah.
Do you yourself follow the regimen?
Oh, very close, sometimes a little bit more, but I wouldn't think of drinking a drop of caffeine because, for instance, we have 70 employees at our place. And I don't even allow caffeine on the premises. I became so convinced.
Okay. And that's an important point to make here, because it's not just the drinking of the water, but it's also the elimination of caffeine and alcohol from the diet.
Yeah, they're deadly diuretics. So I had to see it over and over and over. And finally, certain illnesses, like asthma. Last year I put up $50,000 if there was one child that we couldn't cure with asthma. Now the whole world knows asthma is a worldwide epidemic. Everywhere but here, because I never saw it fail once with children. With adults, sometimes it takes longer. But the results we're seeing, like I'm in the auto parts business, but I learned to recognize people when they're a couple of quarts low. I mean, like Drew Bauman would come into our place and he looked really rough. And I said, it looks like you've got some health problem. He said, yes, I do. I'm terminally ill with cancer. I've got 26 malignant tumors. Gave me his whole story. I looked at his face. I says, you don't drink any water, do you? He says, no. I said, what, do you live on caffeine? He says, yeah. I said, you probably don't even use much salt. He says, no, I don't. I said, I don't know if this is going to help you with your cancer, but I can tell you this. Within a few days, you're going to have a heck of a lot more energy. Well, which is what happened. But this went on for 4 months, and in 4 months, Drew Bauman from Old Forge, formerly from Old Forge in Scranton, he was 100% free of cancer. Wow, what in the world is this? His whole life changed. But this wasn't isolated to him. It was one after another, like Bob Van Leuvening, who had MS for 7
All
years.
right, and I'm sure there are a lot.
on?
I'm sure there are a lot of different
There's
people,
tons of
Bob, and I know again that you've talked to a lot of these people, but along with the fact that you drink X amount of glasses of water a day, and you eliminate caffeine and alcohol, you also add some salt to your
Quarter
diet.
teaspoon for every quart of water you drink.
But isn't it also just common sense that if I stop smoking, if I smoked and if I drank, if I stopped doing both of those things, eventually I would start to feel better anyway? I mean, that would seem to be common sense also.
There's a common connection with smoking and dehydration. For instance, we've seen people who drink a lot of water, they get detoxified. So the harm from tobacco is literally minimal. But if you're dehydrated and you're smoking, now you're doing major damage. But the water and the salt are the most critical thing. Well, for instance, pretty much anybody in science knows that the foundation for life is oxygen, water, and salt. So therefore, if nothing can kill you quicker than lack of water, other than lack of oxygen, common sense would say, better check your water level before you get carried away.
Well, we hope to find out from some of you out there how successful you've been, or perhaps how it has not worked for you, as you give us a call at 1-800-326-9842. Dr. Brown, I'll come back to you, and I'll ask you the same question I just asked Bob. If I smoke and I drank every day, and I quit both of those habits, wouldn't I naturally start to feel better anyway?
Yeah, you would. And I think I'm not really familiar with any of the specific cases, but I get back to the science of it, and I hate to hammer home on the science, but that's in fact what I do.
I'm delighted.
What?
I'm delighted because I'm going to floor you on the science.
Okay, well, then you can, but again, we've come to realize that a good part of how you feel and how you get better has a tremendous psychological component. And again, which is why you need to do placebo-controlled trials. Just intervening with someone can make them feel better sometimes. It doesn't cure tumors, but I'd have to see that case and look at all the details of it. It's not entirely clear to me. But to eliminate that, you need to give people in a blinded fashion, give them the intervention, and then give them a placebo and see whether it makes a difference, to get rid of this overlay of, well, somebody cares about me and I'm doing something and I feel better, because there's a tremendous amount of that. That's what happens. That's why you need to do what? You need
empathy.
You need to do controlled trials, and they need to be blinded, and you need to show that there's a statistically significant difference between the group that got the intervention and the group that got the placebo to say that the intervention did anything. Sometimes the intervention does bad things, and it actually works the other way.
Dr. Brown, are you aware that when they did a double-blind trial on these depressant drugs, antidepressants, sugar worked much better, but the result was doctored to come out that the drug was working. This was out in the news. Sugar pill infinitely more effective, whereas the antidepressants worked 37%, the sugar pill worked at 43%. So this double-blind trial doesn't necessarily work. It depends who is engineering the result.
Well, it worked, and I don't know what happened to the results of that trial because I did not see it. But
yeah, but every time something is said, you say that you haven't seen it. The information on dehydration or water cure of peptic ulcer disease has been published in the Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology in '83. New York Times picked it up and syndicated it all across America, that water cured peptic ulcer disease. This is the editorial of the journal. This is a mainstream journal.
But this wouldn't be the first case for both of you doctors. Would not certainly be the first case where the medical community in doing research has shifted its thinking, at one point believing that A was the right thing to do and later finding that in fact B was the right thing to do. And I look at something that a lot of people are very, very familiar with right now, and that is the Atkins diet, where, back in the 70s, it was, when it first came out, the thought and the rage that, the high-fat intake would actually help you lose weight. And now studies are starting to come out that suggest that that's not necessarily the case. So aren't we really seeing something played out here that has happened in other studies also?
The role of water was not known, but the effect of it was known throughout history. But no one studied the science of physiology of dehydration. That's what I have done for the past 20 years. When I discovered that water cures pain, I became curious. And then I discovered that pain is a signal of dehydration in the human body.
Now,
So
what about the salt aspect, though, doctor?
there are two oceans of water in the body. There is one ocean of water inside the cells of the body, then there is an ocean of water outside of the cells of the body. The water that we drink goes and joins the ocean inside the cells. We need some salt to retain some of that water in the environment around the cells. These two oceans have to be in balance. You cannot fill up the Atlantic and let the Pacific dry up. That is the reason why you need salt, in order to balance the two oceans of water. Salt has many other functions. Salt is the extractor of acidity from the interior of the cell. So when acid builds up in the cell, sodium goes in, ion comes out. So it's a balancing factor. That's why you also need salt, in order to use it as a pain killer, so-called,
Right.
because it's the acidity that gives you the pain.
We are ready to take our first caller of the evening, and it is Geraldine who is with us in Exeter. Geraldine, welcome to the program.
Well, I was wondering, since I have high blood pressure, what effect salt would have on my blood pressure, since you're not supposed to have salt when you have high blood pressure. So the salt in the water, what effect would it have?
All right, we're going to let both doctors answer that question, and we'll start with Dr. Brown.
Well, theoretically, individuals with hypertension should restrict their salt. A lot of the medications that you take to control hypertension are designed to eliminate salt, and salt has an aggravating effect on hypertension, and that's one of the tenets that are held in clinical medicine. Now, I think that Dr. B has some other thoughts about that, but that's been fairly well established, and therefore I would not recommend salt intake to any extent in a person who's being treated for hypertension.
Now, Dr. Batman-Gelich, that's my common sense thinking would tell me the same thing, but I'm curious
But
as
when
to
the
what
body is retaining salt, it's expanding the volume of water outside of the cells. And from this water, it takes and filters and injects water into the cells. So that is why there is a drive for retaining salt. Medical community goes and says, no, you don't understand the system of hypertension. You must get rid of the salts. In other words, they shrink the water volume outside the cell, and so the blood pressure goes up and up and up. And then they have to give secondary medications, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, and so on. Wrong, because salt is actually good for hypertension, but you need the intracellular elements as well, such as calcium, such as magnesium, and such as potassium. If you give these three other elements to the body, salt actually will bring the blood pressure down. It's a recent research published as late back as 2-3 years ago.
Okay.
Could I add to that?
Absolutely, Bob, before we go on.
I was just talking to Dr. Lang Su from Peckville. He's on staff at Mid-Valley Hospital. And, of course, he may call in. He's had tremendous results with salt. Now, he himself has had high blood pressure for years. And he read the article in Whitaker's Health and Healing. He investigated himself, and now all of his high blood pressure patients, I should say a lot of them, he treats with the watercure and getting fantastic results.
Okay, now you said a lot of them, but not all of them.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's all of them.
Okay.
I know I see it all the time.
Okay.
People telling me, coming in, geez, my high blood pressure's gone. But I can also say some of the people said no. But the majority of them do very well. Now, some of them will suggest they cut back on the salt, because we have Dr. Batman-Gelich's books, and he advises, hey,
Sure.
you've got a problem, work through your doctor. He always says, work through your doctor.
All right. Now, Bob, let me ask you a couple of questions. Before you started the water regimen, what was your weight? What was your physical condition? Did you smoke? Did you use caffeine? And it sounds like I'm asking you questions if you're running for political office. But I ask that because, I see you here today. I've never met you before today. And you look to be very good physical condition. But I'm curious as to what it was before.
Bad day for me is when I feel good. But I was never been in really bad health. I did have a bad back, which I got rid of thanks to the water cure. But I never drank coffee or tea, occasional soda. Never drank enough water. But what a difference. I got totally rid of allergies in a matter of days. Energy went through the roof. It affected my whole sense of well-being. Your mind gets sharper, everything. So while I never had any real major problems, definite improvements.
All right, we're going to head back to the phones. Leona is with us in Kingston. Leona? If not, we're going to move on then to Charles, who joins us from Wilkes-Barre. Charles, go ahead.
I'm wondering about the power of suggestion here, Dr. Brown. If you tell someone something long enough, it seems that eventually they're going to believe it. I'm just wondering what your opinion is on the effect of the psychosomatic element in what Dr. Batman-Gelich is proposing.
Well, I think I alluded to that, and that's a component that needs to be sorted out by using a controlled trial with placebos and in a blinded fashion, so that you can look at people who are getting the intervention and another group who think they're getting the intervention but aren't getting the intervention. And if the two groups have the same response, then in fact it was a suggestion of the intervention and not the intervention per se. And that's why I plead for doing controlled trials that are double-blinded and use a placebo arm.
Now, Bob mentioned about how the fact that he sought help from his back and found it in the watercure. What's your reaction to a statement like that? And obviously you haven't examined Bob, but I'm just curious.
I don't know. I mean, if his back feels better, I don't argue with that. I never argue with success. You know, if it felt better, and certainly water is a very benign substance. It covers 3/4 of the earth, and so it's pretty plentiful, and it's pretty lot less expensive than drugs, certainly. And you know, if it helps people, then I guess that's fine. I just have to, again, I'd like to see. You know, I don't know what the placebo we would use if in place of water. I think I actually thought about that when I was thinking about coming on this show. I can't imagine a placebo that I could find that I could use.
Let me tell you, I went to Howard Spiro of Yale University, who was the editor of Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology. I even paid from the Foundation for the Simple in Medicine $10,000 for a protocol. He took it to the committee at Yale University to get permission to do the trial. They didn't give him permission. They said, no, you can't test water. Now, the problem is, Dr. Brown, that science is there, but we don't get the correct science. We get doctored science that will lead us towards the pharmaceutical industry. As we grow older, from the age of 20 to 70, we lose water from the interior of cells. The ratio of water inside the cells to the water that's outside the cells at the age of 20 is 1.1. In other words, there's lots more water in the interior of the cells. At the age of 70, it's 0.8. In other words, there is a comparative dehydration inside the cells. You take the blood test, it doesn't show anything. But the cell that is inside it has lost so much of its water, is going to malfunction. You see, we don't recognize that. So what we are doing, watercure is correcting this discrepancy. It's a physiology approach. It's a molecular physiology of dehydration. You cannot double-blind it because it's a physiological approach. It's a deficiency disorder. When you're vitamin C deficient, what are you going to compare that deficiency problem with something else? The body needs what? Vitamin C. Why do you want to give it a medication? The body needs water when it's dehydrated. Why do you want to give it medication? The pharmaceutical industry says, no, you go and buy my medication to kill the symptoms of your dehydration.
But Dr. Batman-Gelich, you can't argue with the success of medication. It has been proven time and time again.
You show me one medication that's proven.
I mean, I'm just again.
Not antibiotics, but
that was exactly where I was headed.
No, antibiotics. I was a student of Sir Alexander Fleming at Wright Fleming Institute when I was a medical student. I am aware of antibiotics. The role of antibiotics is different to these other medications.
Okay, because that's exactly what I was thinking of. You know, the advances in antibiotics and the treatments.
I asked Sir Alexander, what made you discover penicillin? He said that we had a lot of people were dying post-operation, and we needed something urgently to find to stop the bacteria from killing people. He said it was with this urge to find something that I noticed a clear ring around the penicillin mold, which was a growing usually in the petri dishes, and searching in what stopped the bacteria colony from growing around there, penicillin was discovered. I understand antibiotics. I'm not talking about infections. But even then, water will enhance the body's own immune system. You know, when you have an inflammation, when you have an infection, you have inflammation. You have a lot of white cells going into an area where you have stagnant circulation. You have stagnant fluids. The body has a mechanism through interferon to activate an enzyme called indoleamine dioxygenase, which acts on indoleamines and tryptophan and produces hydrogen peroxide and ozone. In other words, it brings local oxygen. It manufactures local oxygen. Now, unfortunately, in dehydration and release of a lot of cortisol, this mechanism is shut down. So if Dr. Brown, to all of his patients who have infection, gives them water on a regular basis so that the inhibition goes away, the body will begin to produce oxygen and defend, sanitize and sterilize the local area.
All right. I want to point out to our audience that we're about halfway through the program. We have several callers yet to come, and we'll get to you very shortly. You're watching a Closer Look special edition as we take a look at the water cure, fact or fiction. And Dr. Batman Gelich, who was just speaking about the treatment of elderly. Dr. Brown, I'm going to ask this question first and then come back to Dr. Batman Gelich. I, in doing research for this program, spoke with several nutritionists in the past several days, and to a person, they came back and said, as you get older, the 8 glasses a day, could actually be harmful to an elder individual because it may lead to malnourishment, that they would become so full that they would start to lose the appetite, and therefore in turn perhaps fall into to poor health. So is that magic number 8, or does it need to be adjusted according to our age?
I hate to be, a lot of this is teleology, which is kind of things occur because we think they should occur that way. And I try to avoid that because I think that I would rather replace that again with clinical trials. But the bottom line is it certainly makes sense that the elderly whom we really have problems keeping them well nourished, a lot of times they may not have good access to food, or they may be moderately depressed and not want to eat, or they may just have some anorexia related to aging. Certainly the water would fill them up, and it might hinder their food intake. I would defer that to the nutritionist. That's not something that but I mean that's not an unreasonable hypothesis. I think you would need to subject that to a trial again. Give people water and watch do calorie counts, and then look at another group and see whether they or do the same person, water calorie count, no water calorie count, and see how it affected their diet. There are ways to look at those things in an objective scientific fashion that will give you an answer that you're looking for.
Dr. Batman Gelich, have you been concerned about malnutrition?
Of course I am concerned, because dehydration produces a lot of deficiencies of amino acids, because the body throws some of its essential amino acids at the acid. For example, we become tryptophan deficient, tyrosine deficient, methionine deficient, glycine deficient as a result of dehydration. You need to replace some of these elements in the diet. And people who are elderly, I always recommend that they should increase their water intake gradually. I never recommend that they should immediately go on to 8 glasses of water. And I always say they should also adjust their mineral intake, because that is how the body corrects dehydration. Water by itself in the elderly may not be entirely sufficient. We need to give them the minerals that their body will have lost.
Go ahead, Bob. I can see you. I know you want
Okay, the elderly, a big problem with the elderly is Alzheimer's.
Yes.
Now, every doctor knows basically a person with Alzheimer's, their brain shrinks. Well, if your brain is 85% water, what do you suppose it causes it to shrink? And I've never heard of anybody with Alzheimer's that drank much water. We're basically not talking rocket science. If I'm going to do an interview, and I think I told you this before, well, Women's World last year, September 4th, we had the front cover and the big spread on the watercure. The feature person on that was Amy Bianc, who called me in January of last year. Mm-hmm. And everybody out here in Chicago is talking about the watercure. We want to talk to you about it. And the stories are just phenomenal. I said, have you had any personal experience? She said, no. I said, there's no way you can do a really great interview. But I said, if you check a few things, talk to your audience about asthma, allergies, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritis, and all digestive problems, and throw in weight loss. Do that for 2 weeks, and you'll be so excited, your audience will be so excited that we'll set an all-time record on that station. At any rate, and I said, depression is the easiest. I said, the worse it is, the better, because it usually takes 2 days to get rid of severe depression. At any rate, she called me back in 12 days. Bob, one word, miraculous. She says, I even lost 8 pounds in the 12 days.
But again, Bob, that comes back to, and I have to ask the question, it's not just the water, it's the elimination of caffeine, it's the elimination of alcohol, so there are other factors that come into play, again, which all seem to be very common sense types of things, things that these two doctors have probably been telling their patients for years to do. Cut down on smoking, don't drink 15 cups of coffee a day, and you know, stay away from alcohol.
But you go with the basics, you go with the key, the foundational life, oxygen, water, and salt. Mm-hmm. You know, with your car, you check the oil and water before you start tearing it apart. I can't tell you how many people have come in to our store asking for information, and you look at some of them, they look like roadkill. I mean, they got the raccoon eyes, their skin is all dried out, and they've got all these illnesses. I said, you drink any water? No. Did your doctor tell you to drink any water? No. They're living on caffeine. I said, what's going on here? We're not talking rocket science. We're talking simple common sense.
Well, Dr. Brown, if I came to you and I said, all I do is drink coffee, soda, and alcoholic beverages, you'd probably look at me and say, well, you need to make a change.
Yeah, you get whatever you pay. I would only point out that we are looking at literally millions of years of evolution of water homeostasis in the organism, and there are intricate mechanisms that tell us that we're thirsty and that regulate salt and water balance, and they've served the organism well. It's evolved, and I don't know what Tyrannosaurus Rex had for salt and water metabolism, but we were probably a little more advanced than that.
But, we are throwing at people who are short of the water and salt. We are throwing at them sodas through advertising constantly.
But I'd go back to, I think a lot of this was prompted, I guess, by Dr. Valton's article in the American Journal of Physiology, which I did happen to look at, in which he raises the same issue, that the body is able to extract the free water out of those things.
It's not.
Well, and some of this diuresis, if you drink a cup of coffee, for example, I agree that caffeine is a diuretic. There's no question about that. But you will probably retain some of the free water, and we'd have to look at that very objectively and scientifically.
Well, and Doctor, before we move on, I'm going to ask our director to bring up a quote from Dr. Valton, who is at Dartmouth University, related to the use of coffees, teas, and sodas, and a study that he just concluded that has been published this month specifically looked at the fact that the need for water is something that individuals can find in those areas, and he said that there is now strong scientific evidence that not all of the prescribed fluids need to be in the form of water. Colleagues have shown that caffeinated drinks, coffee, tea, soda, soft drinks should indeed count towards the daily fluid intake in the vast majority of people. Obviously, you don't agree with that, Doctor.
I like to know who funded his research.
Well, that's not a question that I have an answer to.
There you are. And also, Dr. Valton is in the wrong paradigm of science. The basic paradigm of science has changed. Because when I went to medical school and Dr. Brown went to medical school, we were taught that it's the solid matter that regulates all functions of the body. I have introduced a change in that paradigm. I've said that no, it's water that regulates all functions of the body,
and if
including the function of all the solid matter. And that was published as a guest lecture I gave at a cancer convention, and it's in Anti-Cancer Research. The basic paradigm has changed. And this information was evaluated by one of the New York University professors, and they've agreed that we need to change the paradigm of science. It's no longer the solid matter that regulates functions of the body, it's water. So we have to make sure that the body is fully hydrated to function properly.
Well, we have obviously sparked a lot of interest in you out there. Our phone lines are full, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes going through some of the different callers. And we'll start with Pat, who is in 44. Pat?
Yes, I tried the water diet, 8 glasses a day, and what happened to me was my potassium level dropped dramatically. My doctor felt, I drink a lot of milk also, that because of my small frame, 5 feet 3, 105 pounds, that was indeed too much water for me. So I never had a potassium problem before, so I cut it down to 4 glasses a day, 4 or 5 glasses a day in addition to the milk, and my potassium level went up.
So, Dr. Batman-Gelich.
She is advised to replace the minerals. Mm-hmm. Take juice, take orange juice, that's part of the program. Take some form of juice, take fruit, because 80% of food should consist of vegetables and fruit. 20% should be in form of proteins, such as meat or whatever else. If she would take a balanced diet, as it is part of the program, she would get enough potassium.
All right. Lena is with us in Kingston. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the doctor about getting started on his water cure because I read in some of his articles that he suggests drinking half your body's weight in fluid ounces of water per day. And I was a little concerned about doing that since I am a larger sized person. I would assume if I drank that much water, I would start retaining it.
Actually, this amount of water is definitely needed for people who want to lose weight. We've had people who've lost 105 pounds, 126 pounds of weight in 1 year. The program is very successful in weight loss program. If she wants to lose weight, that is the only way to go.
Now, Dr. Brown, if that question had come to you, you would have probably made some other suggestions along with just water, I'm assuming.
Yeah, as far as the fact that she became hypokalemic or had a low potassium because of the increased water intake. Yeah, my gut feeling is that I still think that the thirst mechanisms and the water metabolism that's in the human being and the mechanisms to control water homeostasis that have evolved over the millions of years that organisms have evolved serve us very well. And I think that you need to drink when you're thirsty. And I understand that the doctor disagrees with me, but thirst is sort of the primer to make you drink water. And I think that you can actually overdrink water, as this caller has obviously pointed out.
No one says that people should drink too much water. But
so there is too much water. I mean, it is possible to drink too much water.
Of course there is. I'm not saying that water is something that they should drink a lot. It'll wash out most of their minerals. They have to continuously replace the minerals if they want to keep healthy. But thirst mechanism is a failing mechanism. As we grow older, from the age of 20 onwards, we lose our perception of thirst. This is a research that was done. Younger people with elderly were put on 24-hour water. They didn't drink water for 24 hours. When they put water next to them, the younger people drank copiously, the older people didn't drink properly. They even put water next to the person who was obviously dehydrated. He wouldn't reach for the water to drink it. He had lost his perception of thirst. Does it mean to say that his body was becoming independent of water needs? No. He was slowly dying from dehydration. So there is science there, Dr. Brown. We need to look at the scientific side of the water cure. Molecular physiology of dehydration is a well-known dimension. We've studied it for 20 years, and it's been published, and it's also posted on the internet. All the journals, articles that have been published on that are on watercure.com. You can go and take a look at it. They're all referenced articles. They've been evaluated at peer review settings. And this is new information that's coming out.
Well, and actually,
We can't stay with the old information. That's obsolete. That's giving us the healthcare crisis that's costing the American people $1.3 or $4 billion a year, $1 trillion a year.
You know, I've scanned things like the New England Journal of Medicine, the Annals of Internal Medicine, the American Journal of Medicine, and very reputable things. I would think this would be such cutting-edge, breaking news that the New England Journal of Medicine would be clamoring to get that article.
I presented the articles to them. They wouldn't publish it.
Well, if that material is well done, I cannot imagine
it is well done. You read it. Others read it, and they said it's well done. I got a letter from the editor of the journal. He said, we don't print such stuff. I said, why don't you print such stuff? No, it's not commercial. They won't print it. Who's going to get and do their own business?
Well, I don't know. That's not my understanding of
my understanding.
Of the New England Journal of Medicine.
It doesn't matter. They're all commercial institutions. It doesn't make any difference who is behind it.
All right. We're going to add another doctor to our program as we go to Danville and welcome Dr. Brown to the show. Doctor?
Robert Brown to boot.
Another Robert Brown.
I'm a journalist, and recently came into my possession sort of an interesting volume. It's called The Watercure in America, over 300 documented cases of various diseases that were treated with water. And it was written in 1852 by a group of doctors in New York. And it's a very, very interesting volume. It's some 300 pages long, and it tells all about the treatments and the results and everything else. And just as a point of information, it's a bit of Americana and interest, at least I think so. And I'm doing a story on the volume and so forth and so on.
So your point, Doctor, is that really this is something that the medical community has had knowledge of for quite some time and probably has had differing opinions on for quite some time.
Oh, yes, from practically the beginning of time, I would say that there's been interest in water and its use. And, the Romans made their aqueducts to carry water not only for bathing but for household uses and drinking. So it goes back centuries.
It developed science when I discovered that histamine is a neurotransmitter in charge of water regulation of the body. And most of the drugs being produced are basically antihistamines, other than antibiotics. Tricyclic antidepressants, they're all antihistamines. Painkillers, they're all antihistamines. Tagamet, Antag, and they're like antihistamines. Water is a better antihistamine than anything else. It's a fact. Well, the cells that produce histamine, as soon as you put them in a solution of lower viscosity, they lose their histamine granules, and for a whole month they don't manufacture any more histamine.
All right. So, Dr. Batman-Gelich mentioned the watercure website, and actually we want to let you know that you can view his website, Dr. Valton's study, and other related articles by visiting the WVIA website at wvia.org. You'll find links to both sides of this issue on our website, again, at wvia.org. Bob mentioned this earlier about Alzheimer's, and you made the comment, Dr. Brown, about the New England Journal of Medicine. There are thousands of cases of Alzheimer's, obviously, across this country, but there are several prominent people right now, Charlton Heston, and of course former President Ronald Reagan. If it were, and again, this is a common sense question, gentlemen, if it were as simple as just drinking water, why would someone with the resources of a former president like Ronald Reagan not be doing something just like that?
I don't. That's why
because he's advised by other people who don't believe in the water.
But you have a wife. But you have a wife who obviously wants him to get better also.
She doesn't know anything about the water cure.
All right, Dr. Brown, let's start.
Well, I would just, my only point is, I just can't imagine that there's this huge conspiracy to withhold from the public things that are so salutary. I mean, maybe I'm naive.
It's ignorance.
I don't think, it's ignorance of what?
Lack of understanding, because...
Well, I understand a lot of this. I understand that Alzheimer's disease is a degenerative disease where there's amyloid fibrils in the neurons in the brain, and I have no idea exactly what water does to those amyloid. They're insoluble, so I can't imagine what water would do to them.
That's like MS. With the myelin sheath is deteriorating. 100% of the people, I've talked to lots of people with MS, I've yet to see one that didn't have severe dehydration, and I've seen plenty of people with MS get cured, but nobody's paying any attention.
Well, Bob, but I've also known people who, in search of a cure for multiple sclerosis have turned to things like bee sting therapy and magnets. And, I mean, you know, we are all in search of better health, and we will all try just about anything.
If nothing kills you quicker than lack of water, I mean, if you have this much common sense, well, geez, let's see if we're not low on water.
But let me get back to my question, though. Why? All right, but if it's that easy, why isn't Ronald Reagan better?
Let me tell you something. I wrote to Bernadine Healy when she became head of the NIH. I congratulated her for a new post. I said, please open the windows in that institution, let some fresh air in. And she wrote back a kind letter, and I had sent her some of my materials, and she wrote back and said that she'd enjoyed reading it. She would like to have it evaluated. So when they created the Office of Alternative Medicine, she herself talked to the then temporary head of the office, Dr. Stephan, for me to go and make this presentation at the first Office of Alternative Medicine conference. I did go, I presented this thing. When the proceedings of the conference came out, they had edited my information out of the proceedings, so no one was aware of it. So there is something going on, Dr. Brown. Otherwise, for years I have pleaded with NIH to evaluate this concept. Not a word. To all of them, not a word. AMA, not a word. They have all written polite letters, but none of them are interested to evaluate it.
But Doctor, in all fairness, the perception of a conspiracy isn't proof.
I don't think that is. I think it's stupidity.
Of the fact that it actually will solve all of these problems.
I mean, no one is going to fund that research. And most of the funding is done by NIH or the pharmaceutical industry. And there is a revolving door between the NIH and the pharmaceutical industry.
I talked with a representative from a pharmaceutical company, and he says, Bob, who do you know that does research to put themselves out of business? Auto parts people? We have to answer to stockholders. He says, you're right. I want to put one more thing quick, but I don't want anybody to miss out on this one. I have talked to countless people with cancer, and 100% of the people I talked to with cancer had severe dehydration. I don't think there's any such thing as cancer, by the way. Cancer, diabetes, MS, muscular dystrophy, the common denominator is extreme dehydration. You look at the people's face and you wonder, can't the doctor see that these people are all dried out? I mean, unbelievable. Ladies coming in with big raccoon eyes. I mean, so dried out, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, but both of you make the argument that common sense is what's lacking, and yet in several ways when we come back and try to apply common sense the other way, there seems to be some, resistance.
But actually, there is a movement in the alternative medicine arena to get this information out. In fact, I've been invited to go to Cancer Control Society conference at the end of this month, and I'll be giving a lecture showing how water actually has the potentials as a primary medication in cancer treatment.
Okay. We have just about 10 minutes left in our program and several callers that I'd like to get on the air. We're going to ask the callers to be concise, get to the point. We'll get the answers as quickly as we can as we move to Peckville and welcome Dr. Long to the program. Doctor?
About me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I just want to thank you, Mr. Bob Butts. He's my hero. He has spent over $350,000 out of his own pocket to spread the word of watercure. And the reason I believe in watercure is when I look at Dr. Doreen Day. Are you familiar with Dr. Doreen Day? Who has advanced breast cancer 9 years ago, who cured our own breast cancer without surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy.
All right.
And with the help of the watercure.
All right.
Okay, when I saw the videotape, I became a believer. I have used watercure successfully in my practice for people with high blood pressure, back pain, asthma, depression, and obesity. And I remember one patient with an asthmatic attack, and I admitted her in the hospital, at the Mid-Valley Hospital, and I treat her exclusively only with salt water. When she went home, she continued to take water and salt. As long as she's on water and salt, there was no asthmatic attack whatsoever. She didn't have to use an inhaler, no cortisone,
All
no
right, doctor.
antibiotics.
Yes, and we've heard that from Bob and Dr. Batman-Gelich. I do want to again remind the callers that we are short on time. I'd appreciate it if you get to your point, your comment, or your question, and that's what we're going to ask Paul to do is with us in Carbondale tonight. Paul.
I read an article in the paper last week in New Brunswick, New Jersey, that there was a man who died from water intoxication. Now, I've been drinking 8 glasses a day. I went to the internet, and there are a few sites on that. I just don't understand why this has never come up, pushing 8 glasses of water for years, but the danger of intoxication was never mentioned.
All right, let's go to water intoxication. What is it, Dr. Brown?
Well, you can't drink so much water that, as the one caller pointed out, her potassium fell to a low level. The sodium can also fall to a low level. You can essentially dilute yourself out. You really have to work at it to make yourself water intoxicated if you have a normal heart and kidneys, because, again, the homeostatic mechanisms in the body will essentially eliminate that. You'll turn off any diuretic hormone, and your kidneys will start pouring free water out, and you'll get rid of it, and you maintain a normal sodium and potassium level. But you can't overcome that by overdoing this.
And you've already mentioned, Dr. Batman-Gelich, that it doesn't necessarily be a...
This is actually a case of an athlete who had run and had become completely dehydrated and continued to drink 3 gallons of water.
So too much of anything, again, more common sense, but too much of anything is not necessarily a good thing. All right, Kaz is with us in Sugarloaf. Bob, I know you want to talk, but I want to try to get all the callers in also. Kaz, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I have a question about the water itself. What type of water are you talking? Are you talking about water straight from the tap that possibly has chloride and fluorine and pesticides and other things in it? Are we talking about drinking distilled water? Are we just talking about drinking mineral water with a high mineral content? What exactly...
Whatever water you are comfortable with.
Well, and Dr. Batman-Gelich, Kaz raises a very good point, because one of the parts of Dr. Valentin's study actually raised the issue about the contaminants that are in water today, and the fact that the amount of water exposes individuals to carcinogens just because the fact that they're in the water. So, is there a handoff?
I don't buy the idea of carcinogens being the primary cause of cancer. I think that they are primarily dehydrated, and then chemical becomes an overload. Naturally, you don't want to drink any water that's contaminated. You have to become intelligent and put a filter on the faucet of your kitchen and get rid of all the contaminants.
All right, Bob, I know you want to say something.
If lawn doctors use the same logic of mainstream medicine, brown grass would be considered an incurable problem because no drug or procedure could cure it. And I think that kind of explains it out, because that's where it is. I know what I see every day with people. I have no financial agenda. In fact, we pay people if we can't help them free. Now, I'm not a lunatic. I don't like to throw money away.
No, and I know you're not, and I know you're a strong proponent. But I do have a question, and it's going to be a poignant one. And I ask you to consider it in answering. If in some scenario a member of your family, a close member of your family, contracted an illness, a potentially fatal illness like cancer, and they chose, to treat it just with water, what would your response be? Now, I'm asking, this hits home.
I'd say you're pretty intelligent, because there's no way in the New England Journal of Medicine, October 1986, the long-term survival rate remains an abysmal 3% using orthodox methods of cancer. Now, today you'll hear these high figures, 40% or whatever it is. But if a person lives for 5 years, that's considered a survival. If that person dies 1 day after 5 years, that does not affect the survival rate. I'm talking the New England Journal of Medicine, October 86, 3%. Can you imagine taking your car to a garage with 97 out of every 100 cars went in the junkyard?
All right, but Bob, you as a caring parent, if your son or daughter had contracted cancer, okay, and again, God hope it doesn't happen to you, wouldn't you want them to have the benefit of every potential medical avenue, including radiation and chemotherapy?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't.
Dean Burke, one of the founders of the National Cancer Institute, he says chemotherapy is fraud. You can look it up. One of the founders. He says, keep in mind they can design research to prove daylight doesn't exist. Very famous MD.
So, doctor, if you contracted, you wouldn't?
I wouldn't. I definitely wouldn't. I wouldn't contract it because I know cancer is caused by dehydration. I understand the mechanism thoroughly. I presented it at this conference in 1987. I've researched it ever since then continuously. And today, more than ever, I'm convinced that cancer is a state of dehydration that arises as a result of long-term dehydration when the immune system is suppressed.
All right, now, doctor, I'm going to ask you this question in a slightly different way. I'm your patient. I come to you. I have, you tell me I have cancer. And we start the regular treatments. And 6 months down the road, I say, I don't want to go for chemo anymore. I don't want that radiation anymore. I want to just drink my water and see what happens. What are you going to tell me?
Well, I would say that I'd need to see good data that showed that water was as effective as some of the chemotherapeutic regimens. And some chemotherapeutic regimens, I believe cancer is a delicate balance between the immune system and the cancer cell, which I'm an infectious disease doctor, and cancer cells have a lot of properties that bacteria have, and the immune system tends to deal with them in that way. I think that the goal in cancer therapy should be to destroy as much tumor as you can while maintaining as much immune function as you can. By taking away tumor, you enhance the ability of the immune system to control the tumor, and on the other hand, you preserve that immune function. So I think that's the goal of chemo, and that's why they do studies. And the chemotherapy regimens now have shown good results in reasonable results in patients that were blinded, and some got the treatment, and some didn't get the treatment, and that's why they're approved for use. In
Lorraine Day developed cancer of the breast the size of a grapefruit sticking out of her chest. She knew that chemotherapy is no good for her. She went into alternative medicine, started changing lifestyle, diet, took out caffeine out of her diet. She did a lumpectomy, but all the secondaries under her arms were still there. And she started on the watercure, and within 6 months she was totally free of cancer of the breast, and she testifies to that herself.
I've seen the same thing.
In fact, she advocates water on a regular basis as a primary treatment of cancer of the breast.
This is pure insanity doing anything any different.
All right, now, but there are cases, from, again, the research that I did in preparing for tonight's program, where actually too much water or water can dilute the effectiveness of some, and not necessarily cancer, but of the chemicals or the drugs that are using to treat some illnesses. So in some cases, water is actually bad for you.
No, I dispute that statement. In most cases, water is good for you. I don't think that, if you give the right...
in most cases.
No, the ones that you say they're bad, it's not. It's actually good for them. Because most probably, I don't know what cases you're talking about, most probably that condition is a state of dehydration. All you need to do is to give them the right minerals, you give them the right amount of water, and give them a balanced food, and the body will repair itself.
All right. Well, we are out of time. It has been a very quick hour. I do want to thank all my guests for being with us here. I am sure, could do another hour with the phones full and with these three gentlemen. I do want to thank Dr. Robert Brown, Dr. Batman Gelich, and of course Bob Butts, who are all here tonight to talk about the water cure. A reminder that next week at this time we'll take a look at a local man who has made a name for himself in the animal kingdom. Clyde Peeling will be here on Conversations. I'm Mark Thomas for everybody at WVI. Thank you for being with us, and have a good night.